This conversation feels like a continuation of one we began around 7 years ago. At the time, I spoke about racial trauma. Since then, my thinking has expanded, and through black feminist writers, the likes of Fanon and Baldwin, who I know that you also like, and through psychoanalysis. Alongside, fairly recently, I've been reading John Thorneman's idea of the disinherited, and this is really where I want to focus the talk today. Those whose backs are against the wall, who must develop heightened psychic awareness in order to survive. Black and brown people have long lived with this condition through it, though it extends beyond them to a wider experience of dispossession and inherited injury. So just talking about people that feel unseen and unheard. My interest now is in what psychoanalysis can offer people who live under the kind of pressure, how it might better recognize unconscious racial biases, support those navigating intergenerational trauma, and be expanded or made more accessible by those who have already had to adapt it for their own survival. So, Adam, for those encountering your work for the very first time, how do you understand what psychoanalysis is trying to do at its best?
At its best, I think it's attempting to genuinely listen to what people have to say and to follow what they say rather than to lead what they say. So at its best, it's not prescriptive, it allows people to speak, and it allows two people to see what they're able and willing to say to each other without having sex and without taking drugs or without any kind of physical contact. So it's basically, it's slightly ascetic, obviously, because it's like that. But it's like that because the project is supposed to be, at its best, non-coercive. So we are not trying to teach somebody something. We're not trying to talk them into something or talk them out of something. What I think we're doing is, at its best, enabling them to speak, seeing the effect of what they're speaking has on us, and being able to say something back with a view to showing them how their past informs their present. Not determines their present, but informs it. So, I mean, as you know, the theory of transference, which is a useful idea, which is that when we meet people, we're likely, partly unconsciously, to treat them rather like our parents or our siblings. In other words, the past is always distorting and waylaying and kidnapping the present. And so we're trying to sort this out to some extent, insofar as we're able to do that. So I think it's about clarification. It's also about, there's a French analyst called André Green, and he was asked something like, what's the aim of analysis, or what's a cure, or something like that. And Green said, the aim of analysis is to enable the patient to enjoy life a little more. And I think that's good because it's modest, it's simple, and it puts enjoyment at the centre of the picture.
I like that.
Me too.
Except, I guess, most people don't come to therapy because they are, often it's because they're suffering.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I know psychoanalysis really doesn't want to sit with enjoyment. In a way, it sort of seems to want to sort of drag the past.
Yes, and that's
or the impression.
And that's a real risk, though, isn't it? That it's basically a sort of ideology of suffering, and it doesn't pay attention to people's capacity for enjoyment. And of course, you've got to wonder, if you're not religious, how you justify your suffering, how you legitimate it, what the point is of suffering. And clearly, the cure for suffering, so to speak, is enjoyment, is pleasure. You're not going to get rid of suffering, but whether people can find enjoyments that sustain them seems to me to be the point.
You have also said in some of your talks, or I've picked this up somewhere, that life is about suffering.
I don't, I mean, I may well have said it. I believe that there is no life without suffering, but I don't think the point of life is suffering.
Right.
I think the point of life, so to speak, if you can talk like this, it's a rather ridiculous way, the point of life is to find what the enjoyments are that make one feel one's life is worth living. That's the point. I think anything that justifies suffering is bad. All suffering is bad, in my view, but some suffering is unavoidable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so one of the things presumably we're enabling people to do is to bear their suffering and to see that sometimes it's usefully meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Or stay with their suffering.
Or stay with it, exactly. Not just evacuate it or get rid of it.
Because Melanie Klein did talk about, the depressive position, and that being a sort of a state to be achieved, if you like, which is, when we think about depression, we think it's not necessarily happiness, but it's sort of, and it's not contentment either. It's just being able to be with what life throws at you, I guess, but it sort of seems to be slanting.
But the trouble is, it's such a badly named thing.
I know, that's
because that's the problem, isn't it, really? Because you would think common sense would say, so the aim of life is to become depressed. Well, it isn't. The aim of life is to be able to bear your ambivalence, in her view. So you can bear the fact that you love and hate the same people.
Yes.
And this is a hard thing to do.
Yes, but a really necessary thing.
Yeah.
Okay. You keep drawn to it as a way of thinking rather than as a doctrine or a solution, and I think that's what you're saying, as a way of thinking.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of talk about the history of psychoanalysis, which, it emerged from a very specific European middle class context. How do you think that the history still shapes how psychoanalysis or psychotherapy feels available, or who feels entitled to it?
Well, obviously this is the question, because psychoanalysis, like everything else, started somewhere at a certain time. And to begin with, it was about, broadly speaking, fairly affluent, middle-class, white, mostly actually Jews to begin with, but not entirely. So the question is, well, what's that got to do with us? Or the range of us, which is obviously enormous. And Freud's original patients were not a diverse group. They were a very, very limited group. So what we've been left with is the question of, is any of this adaptable or usable in other cultures with other people at other times? And it is a real question, because the risk is the psychoanalytic trainings perpetuate the idea that we're still in Vienna at the turn of the century, and we're all pretty affluent, and obviously we're all white, and we've got problems about sexuality and work and so on and so forth. Well, things change, obviously, dramatically. Now, the problem has been that there have been purists who want to keep psychoanalysis, who A, claim they know what it is, and B, want to keep it as they believe it is. And that's been the problem. That's what's really stultified psychoanalysis. Whereas interesting psychoanalysis, to me, adapts to the cultures, religions, races, genders, etc. Because it's very obvious when you look back that psychoanalysis is misogynistic and racist. It couldn't be clearer. Now, they weren't thinking that then, but we can think it now, and that means we're then free to have different kind of conversations about it, and how we want to use it, and where we think it's actually more of the problem rather than any kind of solution.
And I was thinking, yes, in Vienna, Freud, and within a kind of middle-class European community, society, but I'm also sort of struck by the fact that none of his analysans were of a diverse community. Are we saying that these people just didn't exist at the time, So it goes back to the sort of sense that I think you're saying that they really did want to keep it specifically to a particular...
Yeah, and they were, consciously or unconsciously, really limiting the group of people who could train to do it.
Right.
Because they didn't want it impurified, or they didn't want it corrupted by other people, which is why the groups are so homogenous.
Right.
And of course, it can't go on like that.
No, and it's definitely very limiting. I mean, and I was going to say, what do you think makes psychotherapy inaccessible? We know that, especially now, financially, culturally or imaginatively. Currently, we could say that this particular culture still goes on, but it's still not as accessible
No,
as
it's
it
not.
could be. So, what would you say might still be behind that, or
Well,
limiting?
the other bit that's interesting in psychoanalytic history is that in Berlin, the original analysts ran free clinics. Anybody could turn up. You weren't charged. And there were a lot of early analysts were socialists. Now that's, you don't hear very much about all that. And of course the great thing about the health service was that, at least I trained as a child psychotherapist, anybody could come to a child guidance clinic and have psychotherapy.
Mm.
That seemed to me a wonderful thing.
Mm.
It very quickly folded, but it was a wonderful thing.
Mm.
And I think in a way analysts have been the enemies of their own profession, because they haven't been sufficiently interested in opening the language up and making it hospitable. Because really, the language has been a club, and it's exclusive, it keeps people out. You've got to have a certain kind of education and a certain set of cultural assumptions to be able to read it at all, or be interested in it.
Yes.
So this has been a fundamental failure, and the other one is, as you say, it's to do with money. It's that it's only for the people who can afford it, and that's an absolute betrayal of psychoanalysis. Because what you find, what I've found, what one finds, is that all sorts of people can use it.
Absolutely.
It's not gender bound, class bound, religion bound at all. It's amazing the range of people who can be interested in it.
Well, I guess they do just need to know what it is.
Absolutely. How do they find out?
And maybe, hopefully, sort of by the end of this conversation, we get some idea of what psychoanalysis is. It's quite interesting, because I sat there thinking to myself, okay, I'm having this talk with Adam. How has it actually affected me? How has it shaped my life? And it's really difficult to say. But however, you've sort of arrived somewhere from where you started off from.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky one.
Sorry to interrupt you, one of my early patients in the National Health Service was an adolescent girl, and she said to me at one point, coming to see you is like sitting round the kitchen table with my mum after school. And I thought that was a great description, because we all know what that means, and really psychoanalysis should be of a piece with ordinary conversation, but just a slightly specialised version of it.
Yes.
But all we're doing is talking to each other depending on what occurs to us.
Yes, and that probably sort of takes me on to the question around training and what analysts learn to see. And the question is, how do you see contemporary psychoanalytic training, and what does it prepare clinicians to notice, and what might it quietly train them to overlook?
I don't know very much about contemporary trainings, but I know a bit, obviously, because I supervise people. Now, as you know, originally we were trained to look out for sexuality and aggression, fundamentally. That was the currency. I think that what that meant, of course, was that an awful lot was overlooked, because psychoanalysts were extremely sceptical about religion, and of course psychoanalysis evolved in a white supremacist culture. If you live in that culture, you don't think, I'm in a white supremacist culture, you think this is just the way the world is. It doesn't occur to you. And certainly you must have had comparable experiences. When I trained, there were no non-white people, either teaching me or training with me. When I went to work in a child guidance clinic, where most of the children we saw were Afro-Caribbean, not all, but most, there wasn't a single non-white person who worked in the clinic. And this was not an issue. It was never discussed or particularly noticed, if you see what I mean. This is just, we were just carrying on. So I hope and imagine this has changed, that the misogyny in psychoanalysis has been radically altered, I would have thought. It would have to be by now, because now there are generations. It must be better. I mean, I don't mean it's been solved, but it must be at least discussed as an issue, which is quite an advance. And the racism has to be prevalent and just integral to what it's doing.
Because, I know from statistics that the proportion of black and brown people or indigenous people needing help within the mental health services is disproportionately higher than sort of the white counterpart. So in a way, it kind of begs the question that we kind of need more representation. And representation matters.
Yeah, it does.
It really does.
I saw when I worked at Canepa-Anson, there were lots of girl gangs, adolescent girl gangs. And I remember one of these girls, who was Afro-Caribbean, saying to me, there are no black people in this clinic. I said to her, what do you think we should do about that? She said, burn it down. And I thought, yeah.
I love that story.
I mean, that's always stayed with me, which is why
Yes.
you've heard it before.
I mean,
but it's really powerful, and it was really powerful at the time.
Yes. But it's also powerful in the sense that she could say what she wanted,
Yes.
what she really felt.
I agree, yeah. And that's a good bit.
Mm. And I do remember you saying in one of your talks that, that's not the solution. However, there is something to be kind of reflected and thought about in that.
Yeah.
Because it's really begging the question of how do we get more representation, and because it's really needed, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that reminds me of, when I was working in a psychiatric unit as well as a kind of trainee counsellor when I first started my training, and I had, again, there was just one black girl actually who took a shine to me, identified with me, and it was often quite difficult because you kind of try not to provoke the envy of the other clients, and also, I guess, in a way to sort of protect her because, this was a kind of day, this sort of daycare, but, I worked just during the day, and all sorts happened after hours, and it was quite toxic environment where, there's a lot of self-harm going on, but really kind of quite violent in itself. And just the identification and, the when are you coming back, and this wish actually that it provoked in me for me to sort of take her out of that space. But it's a real helplessness because you could kind of see that the environment really wasn't thinking about her needs or how she actually fitted within an environment that is all white, where she then will become the target of projections, and so she sort of really clung to me, and I was sort of struggling with being a counsellor, and sometimes she'll cry on my shoulder, and being and just not being able to it was just a really complex situation,
and both being in a different way equally helpless. Both stuck with this.
Equally helpless, absolutely. Yes. On that note, I shall on that helpless note, I just ask you another question.
Yes,
then. Hopefully maybe this would sort of somehow find its way into hopefully at the end we can make something of all of this.
I should say I don't feel hopeless.
You don't feel hopeless?
About the value of psychotherapy to people for whom it works. See, I think the problem has been that people have made claims for psychoanalysis that are just wrong. See, we shouldn't be saying psychoanalysis is better than aromatherapy and worse than neurology. We should be saying it's just for the people who like it. But I, who like it, am going to make a case for it to you, whoever you are. See what you think, and if you're curious, try it out. Just that. No grand claims, no inner superiority, no assumption that it's the way or a religion. Just, this is the kind of thing we do. Try it out and see what you think. As ordinary in the best sense as possible.
But I kind of feel that it can be helpful for a lot of people.
Me too.
And I guess it's something about being able to offer, or being able to express, or being able to show people, I guess, in a way. Because it's really hard to trust in talking therapy. But we also know that evidently it's been proved to be more successful, even within the NHS.
And you could think, one of the things we're trying to do is stimulate an appetite to talk and to listen.
Okay. Let's think about intergenerational trauma. Do you think the current training, or the way we see psychoanalysis at the moment, is equipped to work with intergenerational and collective trauma, or historic trauma?
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure. Obviously, you would hope it would. And one of the interesting things, developments after the Second World War, was that people did research and did psychoanalysis with Holocaust survivors and the children of Holocaust survivors. Because in a way this was exactly the issue being addressed, which is, what is the transgenerational effect of real trauma? And I think that in a way, because there's a wish to forget things, because they're too painful, it got a bit sidelined. But of course they were really onto something. Because even though that's a massive trauma, there are plenty of massive traumas historically. It's not the only one. And that would seem to me potentially a way into precisely working out the effects of transgenerational trauma, which are obviously real, and then what is to be done. How should one listen? What is there to say? What can be actually genuinely transformed, and what is it that people have to find a way of living with, etc. But these are the real test cases. It seems to me, this is one of the things that psychoanalysis should have been and was invented for. It's not accidental that this thing happened and was developed during 2 world wars, when there was a massive amount, obviously, of trauma. And of course, prior to that, apart from the many Holocausts there are culturally, there was also 200 years of slavery in America.
Yeah.
And so all these emigre analysts go to America, and some of them are really interested in social theory and history, and some of them are really not. And so, unsurprisingly, very few people, black people, trained until relatively recently.
Psychoanalysis tries to heal the individual. I can't see how we can heal the individuals without the collective trauma.
No, I agree with that. There's no way, and that's why there's group therapy and family therapy, because we know there aren't really individual problems. There are group problems. It seems to be the most promising way of looking at this. But I agree, without a real sense of cultural, racial, religious history, you can't get enough of a context.
So just sort of taking that sort of slightly further, so when, say, one is sat in a room, the sort of black and white dynamics, or Jewish dynamics, or whatever one is carrying in terms of sort of their intergenerational trauma, what would be the role of the therapist then in being able to be with this? Are we saying that the client then needs to bring it up? Or are we saying that, the therapist needs to be almost informed? I guess that's not going to be possible in every situation.
No. I mean, we have to fundamentally acknowledge that when people are doing therapy, it's a rendezvous of 2 transgenerational histories, the analyst and the patient. This is just a fact. And the question, as you've said, is, and what is to be done with that? Both the analyst's transgenerational history and the patient's. It would seem to me that there's a real risk of being a kind of bystander. And again, we're going to have to, there can't be a method for this, there can't be a principle, but it seems to be when and if we feel that either straightforward didactic history is needed or more investigation of transgenerational histories, we must follow these things up. We can't just talk as if everything's about mothers and fathers and upbringing, because it's not like that. We know that. So we've got to have a larger view, and we've got to be able to be more imaginative, and we're going to have to take risks clinically. Bringing things up that somebody either obviously might not want to talk about or might be irrelevant to them. We just don't know.
Yeah, it's a very tricky one because I have had clients in black clients in trainee therapists in practice who are just waiting to get their qualification to get out.
Yeah.
And I just find that so demoralizing and upsetting, on their behalf, and just generally how come our training is not progressive.
Exactly, it's not hospitable because they should be feeling this is a great experience.
And
there's a lot here for me.
This is a great opportunity because
yeah.
I think the white world, given that black people and brown people and indigenous people, there are, the global majority, but in UK they're the minority. There's a lot to be learned from them.
Yeah.
Because they've had to navigate this world.
Yeah. And therefore, these are exactly the conversations we should be having.
But then it requires a sort of humility, if you like, or
well,
humbleness.
It certainly requires
curiosity.
Yes, it certainly requires a genuine interest and curiosity in other people's experience.
But if the other has been sort of prescribed, if you like, as not worthy of the attention, it becomes very difficult.
Yeah, and they may come from a family history where this has been transmitted and experienced.
Who might come from family history?
Any given person who walks into our rooms was going to come with a transgenerational history,
Yes.
and part of that transgenerational history might be to have been ignored, brutalised, exploited, etc. for generations. And that has got to be acknowledged. It's got to be woven into the story.
But I was actually talking about, whiteness now and how it has not been, it's been kind of almost, it works in such a way that, colour is just, it's almost like it's not seen.
But
so how would they be interested?
Yeah, but that's the problem, isn't it? When it's not seen, it's just taken for granted, as if to say, "There's really nothing to talk about here."
I know, and therefore there's no real interest.
Yes, yeah.
And that is really a problem.
Yeah, yeah. And so you could think one of the things we're doing in our work is stimulating curiosity and interest.
Yes. You've been critical of Robin DiAngelo's white fragility. You've also been, you've picked up points in her work that worked, and I actually think it's a very interesting book.
Yeah,
but,
I agree.
There is something about, the title of the book, white fragility. I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly.
Fragility.
But that's very telling, the title of the book, because it introduces the topic with such a bias.
And also, it's almost as if we need to go in there.
Absolutely.
I guess that's the
white
bias.
people need looking after.
Exactly. And looking after because they are fragile. But everyone's fragile.
Of course. Everybody's fragile, everybody's guilty, etc. But there's a really bad history here.
There's a really bad history here, which, we really need to look at. And, we can't... I was just thinking, when you compare the oppression that's happened, with black and brown people over the years, the idea of guilt and shame, it's not comparable.
No, of course it's not. And this blaming the victim stuff, that you have made me feel guilty. This is just scandalous.
Yes.
But, what it means is that, there's a huge amount of fear in all this. And that's the difficult thing to broach, I think.
Do you know what the fear is? Or what would you say is the fear from your perspective?
Well, I think the fear is self-hatred, and the fear that it will stimulate violence reactive to this. That it'll make me feel incredibly aggressive because you are making me feel bad, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to evacuate it in violence. Because for example, you mentioned at the beginning Fanon. Well, you could think in every psychoanalytic training there should be a course on Fanon.
Yes.
Obviously. Whereas I doubt anybody does do this, but they obviously should be doing it.
I did teach difference and diversity, and thought that would be a really helpful, useful chapter to put in the race paper. But I'm not sure how much there was a lot of resistance, in terms of sort of the audience, which, we had one black girl, predominantly white, but white European, white, different in geography. But there was a lot of resistance to actually reading this paper. And as the seminar lead, it was really, again, very difficult to engage.
I don't think it's a mystery that. I think it's extremely dispiriting, but I don't think it's a mystery because I think that a lot of people really don't want to be made to feel guilty, and they don't want to hear about violence,
right? Because
it really disturbs them, obviously. But it's a completely unrealistic fairy tale to live in a sort of non-racially alert culture. You can't actually live like this anymore.
No. And this is partly my it's wish, hope, concern in doing this talk, because I kind of feel that there is a sort of blind spot. Some is unconscious and some is clearly quite conscious, and people want to not remember or deal with it. But like you say, those that are being oppressed, standing up, they're different generations now, and they don't see themselves as lacking or as skin color being,
or as intrinsically victims.
Absolutely. How do you understand the psychic dynamics between white and black people in contemporary conversations about race, particularly around defensiveness, guilt, or disavowal? And I think we just sort of covered that. But I was just wondering if we were to put this on the syllabus as something that can be taught and worked on. And I know that there's various groups at the moment that have been established, on whiteness, and they're making great progress. I mean, I spoke to Frances, who has been doing quite a lot of work on anti-racism. And, at the end of the conversation, she was talking about, yes, we need to sort of, it's got to be top down, and, everyone needs to be singing from the same sheet, and, we need to bring down white supremacy, and, racism is violent and aggressive. And in the conversation, I had to say to her, you know what, I really sometimes just don't want to have to talk about this, because actually sometimes having to hear this is quite demoralising.
Yeah, it is. That's the thing, though, isn't it? Which is that when you learn the history, either personal histories and or history, it's very easy to lose heart. Because I think the other thing that's being warded off is a real absolute despair about so-called human nature. That if this is what we're capable of, why go on with it? Because I think there's lurking real despair here, as there should be. Because if we really are like this, what then?
And the like this, I think it's just, people say, it's something that I didn't take part in. It's a sort of previous generation. And, what can I actually do about it? Sort of thing. But I think, in answer to that, my thought is that one, and I think you brought it up about being complicit, because one is living of the benefit and of the privilege of that at the expense of the other.
Yeah.
So whichever way you look at it, there's just got to be awareness of that.
Yeah, that must be right. But there's also a way in which psychoanalysis could be useful along I think two lines. One is scapegoating and projection. What is being projected into races such that we treat them like this, and also envy. There's tremendous envy is integral to racism, I think. And this is not uninteresting, I think. It's not the answer, but it's potentially useful.
And you said somewhere in some of your talks that, what would happen if people stopped being racist. Something around there would be more suicide or something.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you could talk about that, because, I would like to think that it doesn't have to be that bad.
No, me too. But I think what I meant was that if we weren't racist or misogynistic or whatever, in other words, if we didn't scapegoat somebody or some group of people, we'd then have to deal with our own hatred, our own violence. And the risk is it would be turned against ourselves.
Right.
I think that's the logic of it. I don't know if it's true, but that's the logic of it. The question is, what do we do with our hatred because we're so traumatised by it? Well, we hate other races. We select our race and we hate it and punish it and humiliate it. And we do all these things to both evacuate bad feelings and to make sure these things are not done to us.
And it just made me think about internalized racism amongst people of colour. Because what do you do with that hatred?
Yeah.
At some point it becomes internalized. And things like hypervigilance, paranoia, I guess.
And it feels real. It really feels real.
Well, because it is real.
Yeah.
There is reality to it in the sense that it's just everywhere.
Yeah, it is everywhere. Yeah. But that presumes, if it's everywhere,
yes.
that's because there's a problem about hatred. What do we do with our hatred?
There is a problem with hatred. And I guess for me, when I was growing up, my parents really hardly talked about racism. It's quite an interesting topic, which a lot of people of colour, black people, talk about, because the question being, do you talk about it or do you not talk about it? If you talk about it to your children, you prepare them for it, because there's the reality to it, in the sense that they may be wondering why can they not join join a particular club, or why have they just been ignored in a line of, people and their names haven't been called out. So at the very least you begin to work on it. But somehow, when I was growing up, my parents really didn't talk about it. And, in retrospect, I think it might have been because, and I don't know whether it did me a service or a disservice, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think it's been, and I wonder, and as I'm talking, I'm thinking about it, because my formative years, if you like, was in Nigeria, where I grew up until I was a young teenager, and I really didn't have that as a challenge.
Yeah.
So maybe that's why it wasn't talked about.
But if your parents or one's parents tell us about racism when we're young, they're basically saying to us, there's a terrifying world out there.
Yes.
So, and is this a world worth growing up into? And do you want to enter it? So I think it's like, how do you keep your children's spirit alive?
I know. And I think that is the sad reality. And I think, for a lot of parents, even if it's not talked about, their experience is going to be within the family dynamics. It's, whether it's spoken.
It's going to be there.
It's going to be there anyway. So we're talking about trauma here that gets passed down.
See, in the family I grew up in, which was a Jewish family, the Holocaust was very rarely talked about, and Israel certainly wasn't talked about. But there was the implication was, or the project seemed to be, it wasn't explicit, that we wouldn't be victims. So you'd grow up as a Jewish child, not as the victim of anything, if you could. This was the project. And it took a very long time to find out about the history. And I think partly because obviously our parents and grandparents' generation were trying to recover to some extent to make their lives viable, but also, it's a terrible history, as are all these histories. And you couldn't help but think, what am I inheriting here? Not why are all these people terrible to me, but what's the effect been on my family of being treated like this for all these generations. What's it done to me? What's it left me feeling about myself?
Yeah. And that's a big question, isn't it? Because we don't really know.
No, exactly. And we can't ever know, but we get glimpses.
Yes, we do. And I guess, when it becomes diabolical and, going back to the disinherited now, where people are just not able to function as a result of all the negativity.
Yeah.
How do we get to these people? Which makes me think of the question of...
I don't know if this is your question, but what this pause made me think was that I think what can be useful for people is to put things in the active rather than the passive voice. So somebody might be abject, muted, and dispirited. And one of the ways of describing this is it's an attack on their agency, on their autonomy, on their vitality. So they experience, and their experience is right, the world has actually quelled them. It's really, really diminished them. The problem is the internal collusion with this.
Yeah.
So I then go on with it, if you like, internally. And so this could be described as me attacking my vitality, me attacking my forcefulness, my effectiveness.
Yes, it's a very difficult project.
It is.
Because it's almost like there's got to be a renewed task each day of, it's almost like positive thinking.
It is a bit like that. It's a bit like deliberately sustaining yourself in a particular position.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But at the same time, I just wanted to talk a little bit about whiteness and white supremacy in terms of I think that there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that field. I was somewhat invested in that work, where I was offering workshops around racism and what it means, and how people are feeling and why it needs to stop, and all of this. And then I just found it draining and not necessarily fulfilling. One of the things that came through for me, which kind of quelled it for me, was a question that I was asked in one of the workshops I was offering right at the beginning. And the question was, who wouldn't want to be pretty? To which I thought, are you talking to me? Because I really don't understand what that question is. But what it then reminded me of is, and I'm not thinking about, we don't want certain immigrants, we only want some. Where I lived in Barcelona for a while, and some of the locals would say to me, "You're fine, you can stay, you contribute, but the others can't." And I'm thinking, why would you think that if you treat somebody that looks like me, that is, of course, going to affect me? We're not related, but in a way, this is a collective issue.
Yeah. But what it makes me think of is, and there's a pervasive fear of loss of love.
Of loss of
love. There are two things around. There's the need to protect oneself from attack, internally and externally, and there's the fear of loss of love. And what is it about oneself that means one's going to lose the love of the people around one? And that's somewhere in the middle of this, I think.
I think if we can sort of just overcome our fear, and it does make me wonder what listening would truly look like within the training. If we could just go past that bridge of a loss of love, a loss of thinking, a loss of self, if you like, because one decides to explore somebody else's culture or world. Actually, not to think that you're going to kind of just be taken over by something or someone or some experience, but actually maybe it can be revitalizing.
Yes, I agree. I mean, in a sense, one is analysing people's wish to be controlled. Or the part of oneself that wants to be controlled. But I can't imagine a person, I don't know if you can, but I can't imagine a person who isn't preoccupied by loss of love. And that being continuous from, birth, so to speak, onwards. Because the fundamental sustaining thing is the love of the object that one needs, or the objects one needs.
Right.
If you live in a culture that is continuously hostile, you are continuously living, it's not loss of love, it's there is no love there. And that can only bring out the worst in somebody. It can only make somebody crazed with fear, and therefore very, very aggressive.
Can you expand on what you mean by loss of love? Because I'm really wondering on which side is this loss of love?
Well, if I come as an immigrant
Right.
to England, and people are pretty racist and unpleasant to me, obviously the discrepancy, let's say, between my babyhood and infancy and the world I found myself in is devastating. In other words, this is a world of people who do not care about me. Not only do they not care about me, they want to harm me. So the very thing that has sustained my vitality, which is actually being loved and being cared for, is not there.
Right.
And I can only imagine that everybody must have that, whatever else they've got.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a terror of not being loved and cared for. And if you're in a world that is radically hostile, you live in continual terror.
Yes. There's got to be something inherently there, I guess, foundational.
Yes, there must be.
For that survival to happen. But also groups. I think, the spaces where I attended a Black Asian Therapy Network. They put together a gathering of black people, black Africans within the diaspora on the weekend gone. And that was just really interesting and quite different in a really nice way, because apart from all that's going on and the crying and the pain, there was also a sort of joy, a joy of sharing.
Yeah.
And some of these meetings that I go to through Baton, at the beginning of it we do like breathing exercises, and at the end of it they put some music on.
Yeah.
You get all those drums and people are dancing.
But that's crucial
Zoom.
to this, isn't it? Which is,
No, it
how
is.
do you keep the joy and the delight alive?
Yes.
Or is this some earnest tragedy that we have to go on
Yes.
wailing, crying about?
Yes, which makes me think about, when we're sat in a room with someone that is different to us, just go with it.
Yeah.
The client wants to get up, the client can get up.
Yeah.
They don't need to sit in a chair.
Yeah.
It reminds me of when you say, taking a child for a walk and the child taking you for a walk. If the child gives you their hand, take it.
Yeah.
That's really the principle,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And then we can go from there.
And also notice, as the therapist, when you start refusing to follow,
Mm-hmm.
or when you begin to want to lead.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
In other words, when you become frightened of your curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Which I think we have a lot of, with this current training that we've got, because, where does the knowledge lie?
Yeah. And what is the knowledge?
And what is the knowledge? It's such a tricky and difficult place, because, it takes me on to my book, which I've been trying to publish for the last 4 years. And, got the big publisher, but because I'm not dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's and putting in the relevant references, it doesn't sound as if it can be published. We cannot put our theories out there unless it's backed by somebody who is known, because there's this marketing agenda.
Yeah.
But also within our own community, it's really difficult to back one another.
Yeah.
Because actually what's happened is that, due to sort of the displacement, people are not coming together.
Yeah.
Neither are black
Yeah.
people one homogenized group.
Yeah.
But it's really difficult to be trusting of one another. But that's really where the project lies.
Yes, and the preconditions for trusting each other is enjoying each other's company.
Yeah, but if you can't even come together
Of
in
course,
the first place,
nothing can happen.
Nothing can happen.
Yeah.
So, I have put together something on the Baton site to say, let's collaborate.
Yeah.
Let's collaborate.
Yeah.
Come with whatever it is
Yeah.
you have to offer.
Yeah.
Come with your thinking.
Yeah.
Come with your ideas.
Yeah.
Come with your book.
And that's the only kind of thing that will make anything happen.
I think so. I think it really does have to boils down to collaboration.
Yeah.
So on that note, Adam, you've shared your ideas generously through your writing, talks and public thinking. And I just want to say thank you so much on behalf from me to you, to say just all the conversations we've been having over the 7 years. It's been, it's been really enriching. I have found you to be willing, even in situations where you might have thought, I don't agree with you, especially when we spoke about spirituality. My belief in spirituality, that we're not just... And how you've kind of opened up, and we've been able to talk about that. So I think it can work, and I guess maybe this is what is at the heart of psychoanalysis. Listening, talking, having conversations, and being able to talk about what matters to one another. And it's finding people that...
Yeah, I agree. And also, I'm dependent on your recognition and your articulation of it. Because we're doing this together.
We
really.
are doing it together.
And that's the only way we can do it.
Yes, but I think for me, it's something about safety. And I can't really stress that enough, because I think that basically for me is what it's all about.
And it's the only thing that makes things possible.
It is the
Otherwise,
only thing.
one's in a state of vigilance, and once one is vigilant, there's no mental space.
Yeah, and the safety happens because you offer. You are generally somebody that's you're very generous and you're very kind. So I just want to sort of ask you about kindness.
I'll tell you what mystifies me, and this is obviously my naivety in a way, because it's quite obvious, it seems to me, that we are much happier when we are being kind and when people are kind to us. So why aren't we kind more often? It's obviously pleasurable and reassuring and delightful. There must be a real phobia about pleasure here, because kindness works.
Pleasure and vulnerability, basically.
Yeah, pleasure and vulnerability, which go together. But the effect of kindness is amazing. Both being it and having it done to oneself.
I think people do like to receive it, but I'm
Absolutely.
not sure how much they want to kind of
well,
offer
that's the
it.
thing. Yeah, but it should be both ways.
It should be both ways.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.